The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I placed the final regulatory compliance report on Director Marcus Blackwood's mahogany desk. 10 years at Meridian Financial, and I still felt invisible in rooms like this. The executive conference room reeked of leather chairs and expensive suits, while I stood there in my modest blazer, clutching a folder that could save the company millions. "Celine," Marcus said, without looking up from his phone, "you're just a clerk. Leave the thinking to people who actually understand finance." His words hit like ice water. Around the table, senior executives smirked. I had discovered a massive regulatory violation in our overseas transactions, something that could trigger federal investigations and destroy our banking licenses. But Marcus waved me away like I was interrupting his golf plans. "The compliance audit is next week, sir," I tried again, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "This pattern in the Singapore accounts." He finally looked up, his cold blue eyes cutting through me. "Celine, I don't pay you to second-guess our international team. File your little report and let the adults handle the real work." The room fell silent except for a few muffled chuckles. I nodded slowly, that familiar burn of humiliation creeping up my neck. But something else stirred beneath it. Something sharper, colder. For 10 years, I'd absorbed every condescending comment, every dismissive gesture, telling myself it was the price of staying in the game. Not anymore. That night, I sat in my small apartment, staring at the compliance files spread across my kitchen table. The violation wasn't just serious, it was systematic. Someone had been moving money through shell companies, bypassing international banking regulations for over 2 years. The trail led directly to Marcus's department. I made coffee and settled in for a long night. If Marcus thought I was just a clerk, he was about to learn how dangerous an underestimated clerk could be. Because while he was playing golf and dismissing warnings, I had been quietly building something he never saw coming. The question wasn't whether I could expose him, it was whether I was ready to destroy everything he'd built. The next morning arrived gray and bitter, matching my mood perfectly. I walked into Meridian Financial with my usual quiet demeanor, but underneath my mind was razor sharp. 24 hours had passed since Marcus's humiliation, and I had spent every minute of it digging deeper into those Singapore accounts. What I found made my blood run cold. The compliance violation wasn't accidental, it was deliberate. Someone had created an intricate web of shell companies, each one designed to move money offshore while avoiding federal detection. The transactions followed a pattern so sophisticated that it had to be orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of banking regulations, someone exactly like Marcus. I sat at my desk outside the compliance department, fingers trembling slightly as I opened the file on my computer. $300 million had moved through these accounts over 18 months. Money that should have triggered automatic regulatory flags, but didn't, because someone had manipulated the reporting systems, the same systems Marcus oversaw as Director of International Operations. My phone buzzed. A text from my supervisor, board meeting in conference room A. Take notes. I gathered my notepad and walked down the hall, my mind still processing what I'd discovered. As I entered the room, I saw Marcus at the head of the table, confident and commanding as always. Board members hung on his every word about quarterly projections and expansion plans. "Our Singapore operations are performing exceptionally," Marcus announced, clicking through his presentation. "We've exceeded profit targets by 40% this quarter." The board members nodded approvingly. I sat in the corner, invisible as always, but my pen wasn't moving across the notepad. Instead, I was calculating. 40% profit increases didn't happen naturally in established markets. They happened when someone was cutting corners, big corners. As Marcus continued his presentation, praising the innovative financial structures his team had implemented, I realized the scope of what I was looking at. This wasn't just regulatory violation, it was fraud. Systematic, deliberate fraud that could bring down the entire bank if discovered by federal investigators. And Marcus was about to get promoted to senior vice president based on these numbers. I watched him smile at the board's praise, completely unaware that the little clerk in the corner had just uncovered his entire operation. He thought he was untouchable, protected by his position and connections. He was wrong. That weekend, I didn't leave my apartment. I ordered takeout, ignored my phone, and spread every document across my living room floor like a detective solving a murder. Because in a way, that's exactly what I was doing. Solving the murder of everything Marcus claimed to stand for while he systematically stole from the bank that trusted him. The money trail was more complex than I'd initially realized. The Singapore accounts were just the beginning. Marcus had created a network of subsidiary companies across 7 countries, each one designed to exploit specific regulatory gaps. Money would enter as legitimate business investments, get washed through multiple transactions, and emerge as personal profits in offshore accounts. It was brilliant, actually, and completely illegal. I discovered that Marcus had been using his position to approve fake loan applications, then funneling the money through his shell companies. The bank thought it was making legitimate international investments, but in reality, Marcus was stealing millions while building his reputation as a financial genius. But here's what he didn't know. I hadn't been just a clerk for years. My official title might have been compliance administrator, but I'd been quietly building relationships with federal banking regulators, attending industry conferences, and earning certifications that Marcus never bothered to notice. While he saw me as furniture, I'd been becoming an expert in exactly the kind of financial crimes he was committing. I had contacts at the Federal Banking Commission, the Securities Exchange Commission, and the International Financial Crimes Unit. People who knew my work, respected my analysis, and would take my calls. Marcus had always assumed his Harvard MBA and family connections made him untouchable. He never considered that the quiet woman taking notes in the corner might have more powerful allies than he did. By Sunday night, I had a plan. Not revenge, justice. I would give Marcus exactly what he'd been asking for, the chance to prove he was smarter than everyone else. I would let him walk directly into a trap of his own making, using his arrogance as the weapon that destroyed him. The beautiful part was that he would never see it coming, because in his mind, I was still just a clerk. Monday morning, I walked into Marcus's office with a cup of coffee and a carefully prepared smile. He barely looked up from his computer as I placed a single-page memo on his desk. "The Singapore audit results," I said quietly. "Thought you'd want to see them before the board meeting." His eyes scanned the page, and I watched his expression shift from boredom to confusion to barely concealed panic. The memo detailed irregularities in the Singapore accounts. Nothing specific, just enough to suggest that someone was asking questions. "Where did this come from?" he demanded, his voice tight. "Internal Audit Department," I lied smoothly. "They're requesting additional documentation for the quarterly review." I had spent hours crafting this fake memo, making it look official enough to scare him, but vague enough to avoid any immediate verification. They specifically mentioned the subsidiary company structures. Marcus's face went pale. He knew exactly what those subsidiary companies were hiding. "This is probably just routine," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'll handle it personally." I nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. "Celine, this conversation stays between us. Understood?" "Of course, sir," I replied, meeting his eyes with perfect innocence. I wouldn't want to cause any unnecessary worry. But inside, I was smiling, because Marcus had just confirmed everything I suspected. His panic at seeing that memo proved he knew the Singapore operations were criminal. More importantly, his demand for secrecy showed he was about to make desperate moves. Over the next 3 days, I watched Marcus spiral. He stayed late at the office, made hushed phone calls, and started asking IT about document deletion policies. He was trying to cover his tracks, which meant he was destroying evidence that I had already copied and secured in multiple locations. On Thursday, he called me into his office again. This time, his usual arrogance was replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Celine, I need you to help me with something. There are some files that need to be reorganized. Can you handle that discreetly?" I pretended to consider his request carefully. "What kind of files, sir?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Financial records. Some of the Singapore documentation might be causing confusion for the auditors. I need someone I trust to help simplify the presentation." There it was. Marcus Blackwood, who had dismissed me as just a clerk 4 days ago, was now asking me to help him commit obstruction of justice. He was so desperate that he couldn't see the trap closing around him. "I'll take care of it," I promised.
Friday afternoon, I sat in a downtown coffee shop across from Agent Sarah Martinez of the Federal Banking Commission. She was younger than I'd expected, but her reputation for dismantling financial fraud schemes was legendary. I slid a thick envelope across the table, my hands steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to unleash. "This is everything," I said quietly. "Transaction records, shell company documentation, offshore account numbers, and recorded conversations." Agent Martinez opened the envelope, her eyes widening as she scanned the contents. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. 18 months that I can prove, possibly longer." I watched her flip through the documents, seeing her professional excitement build. The subject believes he's successfully covering his tracks. He's planning to destroy evidence this weekend. That got her attention. "You're certain about the timeline?" "I have recordings of him asking me to help delete files. He's scheduled to access the secure server room tomorrow morning." Agent Martinez closed the envelope and looked at me with something approaching admiration. "Miss Lawson, do you understand the scope of what you've uncovered here?" I nodded slowly. "Conservative estimate? 300 million in fraudulent transactions, systematic regulatory violations across multiple jurisdictions, and evidence of ongoing money laundering operations." Her phone was already in her hand. "We'll need you to wear a wire Monday morning. Can you do that?" "Absolutely." But I had one more card to play. "Agent Martinez, there's something else you should know. Marcus isn't working alone." Her eyebrows raised. "Oh?" I pulled out a second, smaller envelope. "The board meeting minutes from last quarter. Look at page 12. She read quickly, then looked up sharply. "The chief financial officer approved these transfers?" I nodded. "And the external audit committee signed off on the Singapore subsidiary structures. This isn't just one person committing fraud. It's a conspiracy involving senior leadership." Agent Martinez stood up, the envelopes clutched in her hands. "Miss Lawson, I need you to understand something. When we move on this, it's going to be massive. Federal charges, public investigations, congressional hearings. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" I thought about Marcus's smug face when he called me just a clerk. I thought about 10 years of condescension, dismissal, and being treated like I was invisible. I thought about the bank employees who would lose their jobs if this fraud continued, and the investors who would lose their savings. "I'm ready," I said. "But Agent Martinez, there's something else you should know, something that changes everything." She sat back down, sensing the shift in my voice. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to reveal would shock even a seasoned federal investigator. I'm not just a compliance clerk who stumbled onto this fraud. I've been undercover for 2 years, working for the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Unit, and Marcus Blackwood isn't the real target. The color drained from her face. "What are you saying?" I pulled out my real credentials, the ones I'd kept hidden for 24 months. "I'm saying this case is about to get a lot bigger than bank fraud. We're looking at an international money laundering operation that goes all the way to the top of the federal banking system. And Monday morning, we're going to take them all down." Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I sat in the FBI surveillance van 3 blocks from Meridian Financial, adjusting the tiny microphone taped beneath my blouse. Agent Martinez handed me an earpiece so small it was nearly invisible. "Remember, we need him to admit to the money laundering explicitly, get him to name the other conspirators." My hands were steady as I clipped the transmitter to my belt. 2 years of undercover work had taught me to compartmentalize fear, to use it as fuel instead of letting it paralyze me. "What about the CFO and the board members?" I asked. "They're scheduled for simultaneous arrests. Teams are positioned at their homes and offices. The moment Marcus confesses, we move on everyone." I walked into Meridian Financial at exactly 8:47 a.m., the same time I had every day for 10 years. The security guard nodded his usual greeting. The receptionist waved from behind her desk. Everything looked normal, but I could feel the weight of federal agents positioned throughout the building, waiting for my signal.
Marcus was already in his office, pacing behind his desk with the frantic energy of a cornered animal. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. When I knocked on his door, he practically jumped. "Celine, thank God! Did you handle those files I mentioned?" I closed the door behind me and took a seat across from his desk. "About those files, Marcus, we need to talk." His face went pale. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward, keeping my voice low and conspiratorial. "The audit team contacted me directly this weekend. They know about the Singapore accounts." He slumped into his chair, running his hands through his hair. "This is a disaster. If they trace those transactions—" He looked up at me desperately. "Celine, I need your help. You understand banking regulations better than anyone. Can we restructure the documentation to make it look legitimate?" "Marcus," I said carefully, "are you asking me to help you cover up financial crimes?" He stared at me for a long moment, then seemed to deflate completely. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. It started with just one account, one small transfer to help with some personal investments. But then the opportunities kept presenting themselves." "How much money are we talking about?" I pressed. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Total? Maybe 300 million. But Celine, it's not just me. The CFO approved every transfer. Board members are invested in the shell companies. Even some federal banking officials are getting kickbacks to keep the regulators away." There it was, the full confession, transmitted directly to Agent Martinez and her team. "Federal officials," I repeated, making sure the wire caught every word. "Who specifically?" Marcus looked around nervously, then leaned across the desk. "Commissioner Bradley at the Federal Banking Commission, Senator Morrison's chief of staff. They've been protecting our operations in exchange for campaign donations and consulting fees." My earpiece crackled softly, the signal that the arrest teams were moving. "Marcus," I said, standing slowly, "there's something else I need to tell you." Before he could respond, the office door burst open and Agent Martinez walked in, followed by 4 federal agents with weapons drawn. "Marcus Blackwood, you're under arrest for money laundering, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." The arrest was swift and professional. Marcus sat in stunned silence as Agent Martinez read him his rights, his eyes darting between the federal agents and me with growing comprehension. "You," he whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "You're not just a clerk." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Marcus, I never was." Within an hour, Meridian Financial was swarming with federal agents. The CFO was arrested in the parking garage trying to flee with 2 suitcases full of documents. 3 board members were taken into custody at their homes. The External Audit Committee chairman was arrested at his country club, still wearing his golf clothes. I sat in Agent Martinez's temporary command center, watching the coordinated takedown unfold on multiple screens. "Commissioner Bradley is in federal custody," she reported. "Senator Morrison's office is being raided as we speak. This is the biggest financial crimes bust in federal history." The scale of the conspiracy was staggering. Over 2 years, Marcus and his co-conspirators had stolen nearly $500 million, bribing federal officials to avoid detection and using their political connections to expand their operations internationally. What started as simple bank fraud had evolved into a systematic corruption of the entire federal banking oversight system. My phone rang. Director Chen from Treasury's Financial Crimes Unit. "Outstanding work, Agent Lawson. The president has been briefed and justice is preparing federal RICO charges against everyone involved." I looked out the window at Meridian Financial, where FBI agents were carrying boxes of evidence to waiting vehicles. "What about the bank's employees, the innocent ones?" "Federal banking insurance will protect depositor accounts," Director Chen assured me, "and we're working with other institutions to ensure minimal disruption to legitimate operations. Your 2 years undercover just saved the entire banking system from systematic corruption." That afternoon, I walked through Meridian Financial one last time. The building was eerily quiet, most employees sent home while federal investigators processed evidence. I stopped at my old desk outside the compliance department, thinking about the thousands of hours I'd spent there, carefully building my cover while gathering intelligence. Sarah from accounting approached nervously. Celine, is it true about Marcus and the others? I nodded slowly. I'm afraid so. But the bank will survive this. The investigation will ensure it does. She looked around at the empty offices. I can't believe you were FBI this whole time. We all thought. You thought I was just a clerk, I finished gently. That was the point. As evening fell, I met with Agent Martinez for our final debrief. The grand jury convenes next week, she said. We'll need your testimony to tie together the conspiracy charges. I nodded, already preparing for the legal battle ahead. Agent Lawson, she said, as I prepared to leave. In 20 years with the Bureau, I've never seen an undercover operation this complex or successful. You didn't just catch criminals. You exposed systematic corruption that could have destroyed public trust in the entire banking system. I thought about Marcus's words from that first day. You're just a clerk. He was wrong about everything. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as news crews set up cameras for what media outlets were calling the trial of the century. 3 months after the arrests, the full scope of the conspiracy was finally becoming public. I sat in the witness preparation room reviewing my testimony one last time before taking the stand. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Reynolds adjusted his glasses as he walked me through the key evidence. The jury needs to understand how deep this corruption went. Your undercover work revealed that federal banking officials were essentially being paid to ignore massive crimes. I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. Agent Lawson, when you take the stand, the defense will try to portray you as an overzealous federal agent who entrapped innocent businessmen. They'll argue that Marcus Blackwood was just making aggressive but legal financial decisions. I almost laughed. Aggressive? He stole $500 million and bribed federal commissioners. The courtroom was packed when I was called to testify. Marcus sat at the defendant's table with his team of expensive lawyers, no longer the confident director who had dismissed me as just a clerk. His co-conspirators filled 2 additional defendant tables, the CFO, board members, Commissioner Bradley, and Senator Morrison's chief of staff. Agent Lawson, Attorney Reynolds began, please tell the jury how this investigation began. I took a breath and launched into the story that had consumed 2 years of my life. The Treasury Department received intelligence that someone was using sophisticated shell companies to move money offshore while avoiding federal detection. I was assigned to go undercover at Meridian Financial, posing as a compliance clerk. The cover was perfect. Financial criminals often overlook support staff, assuming they lack the expertise to understand complex fraud schemes. The jury listened intently as I described building my cover identity, gaining Marcus's trust, and slowly uncovering the massive conspiracy. Did you ever encourage Mr. Blackwood to commit crimes? Reynolds asked. Never. My role was purely observational. I documented crimes that were already in progress and had been ongoing for over a year before I arrived. The defense cross-examination was brutal, but predictable. They painted me as an entrapment specialist, a federal agent who manufactured evidence. But I had something they didn't expect: 2 years of meticulous documentation. Every conversation was recorded, every transaction traced, every bribe payment verified through multiple sources. Agent Lawson, the defense attorney pressed, isn't it true that you manipulated Mr. Blackwood into confessing by creating fake audit documents? I met his gaze steadily. I created one memorandum suggesting that internal auditors were asking questions. Mr. Blackwood's panicked response to that memo revealed his knowledge of criminal activity. If his operations were legitimate, he would have welcomed auditor scrutiny. The prosecution rested after 3 days of testimony from federal agents, banking experts, and forensic accountants. The evidence was overwhelming: recorded confessions, documented money transfers, testimony from cooperating witnesses, and a paper trail that stretched across 7 countries. When the defense presented their case, it crumbled under the weight of documented evidence. Marcus's lawyer tried to argue that his client was merely an ambitious executive who made some questionable decisions. But the recorded conversations where Marcus explicitly discussed bribing federal officials destroyed any claim of innocence. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, I could see the verdict in their faces before the foreman spoke. On the charge of conspiracy to commit money laundering, we find the defendant Marcus Blackwood guilty. The word guilty echoed through the courtroom 17 more times, one for each federal charge. Marcus showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but I saw his hands trembling slightly as the bailiff approached with handcuffs. The CFO buried his face in his hands. Commissioner Bradley stared straight ahead with the blank expression of a man whose entire world had just collapsed. Senator Morrison's chief of staff tried to maintain his political composure, but the weight of federal prison sentences was written across his face. Outside the courthouse, Attorney Reynolds addressed the media while I stood quietly in the background. This case represents the largest financial corruption scheme in American history, he announced. The defendants systematically stole nearly $500 million while corrupting federal officials tasked with preventing exactly these crimes. Thanks to the outstanding undercover work of Treasury agent Celine Lawson, we've dismantled a conspiracy that threatened the integrity of our entire banking system. The sentences came 2 weeks later. Marcus received 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. The CFO got 18 years. Commissioner Bradley, who had betrayed the public trust, received 20 years. The board members received sentences ranging from 10 to 15 years, depending on their level of involvement. That evening, I sat in my apartment for the first time in months without the weight of an active investigation hanging over me. My phone rang. Director Chen from Treasury. "Congratulations, Agent Lawson. The president wants to personally recognize your work at a White House ceremony next month." I declined politely. The recognition was nice, but unnecessary. The real victory was knowing that federal banking regulations would be strengthened, that new oversight mechanisms would prevent similar corruption, and that public trust in the financial system had been preserved through accountability. The next morning, I received an unexpected visitor. Sarah from Meridian's accounting department stood at my door holding a coffee and a newspaper. "I brought you something," she said, handing me the paper. The headline read, "Former bank clerk revealed as federal agent who brought down billion-dollar conspiracy." "You know what's funny?" Sarah said as we sat on my couch. "We all thought you were just this quiet person who kept to herself. None of us realized you were literally saving the banking system." I smiled, thinking about all the times I'd been invisible, dismissed, underestimated. "Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have," I said. "People reveal their true selves when they think nobody important is watching." Sarah laughed. "Well, you definitely proved that Marcus was wrong about you being just a clerk." I nodded, remembering that moment in the conference room that had started everything. "Yes," I said quietly, "he definitely was wrong about that." 6 months later, I stood in the director's office at Treasury's Financial Crimes Unit, looking out at the Washington skyline. The nameplate on the door read, "Director Celine Lawson," a promotion I'd earned through the successful completion of the most complex undercover financial investigation in federal history. My first major decision was implementing new protocols for deep cover financial investigations. Criminals had become sophisticated at hiding their activities from traditional oversight, but they still made the fundamental mistake of underestimating support staff and administrative personnel. We would use that blind spot against them. The Meridian financial case had broader implications beyond just the criminals we prosecuted. Congressional hearings led to sweeping reforms in federal banking oversight, including mandatory rotation of commissioners to prevent the kind of long-term corruption relationships that had enabled Marcus's conspiracy. New federal legislation required banks to implement independent compliance monitoring systems, making it almost impossible for executives to manipulate regulatory reporting without detection. The Lawson Protocols, as they became known in financial circles, established standardized procedures for investigating complex money laundering schemes. My team now consisted of 12 agents specializing in undercover financial operations. We'd already opened investigations into 3 major cases: a cryptocurrency exchange laundering money for international cartels, a real estate development company hiding assets for sanctioned foreign governments, and a hedge fund systematically defrauding pension systems. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying. Every day I remembered what it felt like to be dismissed, underestimated, treated as invisible. Now I was using those experiences to train agents who would infiltrate criminal organizations by becoming the people criminals never noticed: the clerks, assistants, administrators who kept detailed records and understood how systems really worked. Last week, I received a letter forwarded through the federal prison system. Marcus Blackwood, writing from his cell in a minimum security federal facility, wanted to apologize for his treatment of me during our time at Meridian Financial. I read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. Some apologies come too late to matter. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. But I felt no anger towards Marcus anymore, just a distant satisfaction that justice had been served and systematic corruption had been exposed before it could do more damage. My assistant knocked on the office door. Agent Rebecca Martinez, Sarah's younger sister from the FBI. She'd requested a transfer to my unit after seeing how the Meridian investigation unfolded. "Director, we have a new case brief from the Securities Commission. Looks like a major investment firm is using shell companies to hide client assets from federal investigators." I smiled as I took the folder. "What's our entry point?" Rebecca grinned back. "They're hiring for a senior compliance administrator, someone with extensive experience in regulatory documentation and contract oversight." Perfect. Another group of financial criminals who would learn the hard way that the quiet person taking notes in the corner might be the most dangerous person in the room. As Rebecca left to prepare the undercover operation, I thought about the journey from that humiliating moment in Marcus's conference room to this office where I now directed federal investigations. The lesson wasn't about revenge or proving others wrong. It was about recognizing your own worth and refusing to accept other people's limitations on your potential. Sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is simply proving, quietly and systematically, that they were wrong. And sometimes, if you're patient enough and skilled enough, that proof can change entire systems for the better. The phone rang. Another case, another opportunity to protect the financial system from those who would corrupt it. I answered with a smile, ready for whatever challenge came next. After all, I was no longer just a clerk. I was the person criminals never saw coming.